Hello and welcome to Being in the Moment with Jordan Love. And I have a very special guest, Mr. Jon Dwoskin, who is a business coach, author, speaker, and a fellow podcaster. Thank you for being here, John.
Yeah, of course, Jordan. Thanks for having me.
Well, speaking of podcasting, you recently told me you've got about well over 500 plus podcasts coming up. You've had about 500 or so now in the last year or so.
I actually have I think I have about 850 now.
Well, 800,
Yeah.
well,
I've been doing it for a while. I love it. Yeah, yeah.
what is it about podcasting that you're very much enjoying?
For me, Jordan, it's a couple things. One, it's like a mini master's class for me. I love talking to people. I love asking people questions and getting to know what makes them tick. And what got as a business coach, I help people reach their potential. I work with people who are successful and stuck and help them get unstuck. And so I'm always interested in everybody's story. How did they get unstuck? How did they grow? How did they become what they became? And so for me, selfishly, it's like a mini master's class. The way I learn is very auditory. And so I love talking to people, learning from people, and I love sharing that with as many people as I possibly can. And so if I can do my part in helping make others, give others tools, whether it's through me, the questions I ask, or the guests that I have, it's great. From the time I was 18, I've been listening to books on tape of Brian Tracy and Jim Rohn and Tony Robbins and I could go on and on and on. And I've learned so much from them. And so a podcast is a platform for me to do just that, for myself and for as many people as possibly can listen to it.
Speaking of Brian Tracy, I was reading your bio. When you were about 18 years old, your father gave you a bunch of Brian Tracy tapes, and I can't imagine what you were going through at that time. And what I'm curious about is, what do you think your father saw in you at that time for him to say, "Hey, John, here's some tapes." But keep in mind, most people at that age would be like, "Yeah, throw it away, forgot about it." What was it that you think that why he gave that to you?
Yeah, he handed me those tapes. My dad was a dentist, and he was huge into continuing ed. And so he was always listening to these tapes and reading these books and going to seminars, and not only on dentists, but on business as well. Mm-hmm. And so he knew that that scholastically did not come easily to me. And so he handed me the tapes. It was right before I started college. And he said, "Jonathan, not that you won't do well in college, but I think you will learn more from these people than you will college. If you get less than a 3-point in college, I'm going to pull you out and you'll have to come back home. But I really do believe you'll learn more." And from the moment I put it on my ears, it was like music to my ears. I mean, I don't think a day's gone by where I haven't listened, read, done something. And now with podcasts and books on tape and YouTube and things of that nature, it's been the greatest. And so I think he knew that my skill set would be in alignment with them versus how I learned in school.
Yeah, and that's like knowing that as a father now, how do you think your son would react to that situation? I'm not sure how it is now, but like when you give him suggestions or comments, like,
yeah,
to hurt, what does he say? Yeah, I'm going the other way.
I especially when the pandemic hit, I'm always giving my kids books and to read and things of that nature. But I actually will pay them to read books. So there's like a stack of books that I tell them if they read it and talk about the book, I'll give them $50. And then there's another stack of books that if they read it and talk to me about it, they get $100. And so I want them to, of course, read it, but and connect with it. But I think they're really, really important. And so I'm okay with that. I mean, and they've read a bunch of great books. that I don't think they would have read otherwise, that have made an impact on them. And that I think those books, the Who Moved My Cheese, the How to Win Friends and Influence People, I could go on and on. Those books have just priceless lessons in them that, whether I say it or not, they read it or hear it from somebody else. And when it's not their dad, it just illuminates and raises their consciousness when it comes to things.
And that's a great point, because it comes down to education.
Yeah.
And education is so important, and education doesn't always have to be in the form of, it should be in the form of school and college and whatnot, but there's so much more to life outside of just school. Like me growing up, everything was all about school, and then my parents tried to make sure that I had other opportunities outside of that. But I think from that aspect, having their parental support is a very very important thing for us.
Yeah.
When you were about 31 years old, you were diagnosed with dyslexia. It's kind of almost like you were able to see and hear things kind of before they happened. Would you say that that's kind of one of your superpowers?
Yeah, I would say for sure. I mean, I didn't know I had dyslexia. I knew that I wasn't learning I knew that I was learning differently, my whole life. And then through just some things in business that, this presentation I had where I just couldn't remember certain things that I knew so well, I went to my therapist and asked him for an IQ test. And he said to me, you should, at the end of it, it was a 5-day, 2-hour-a-day test. He said, you should buy the book Living with Dyslexia. And I thought, well, for who? And he said, you. And to me, it made sense, because I'd always had to rely on other senses and other ways of learning. And so I realized that I was more of an auditory than visual learner, which made sense why I was so connected to these audio books on tape and these audio tapes and cassette tapes my whole life, because I could retain it so much faster. But because I didn't learn like other people learn, I did have to really kind of connect to pay attention to things that maybe others didn't. And I also think it's just a natural gift that I have. I just kind of pick up on things. And in my coaching world, it allows me to help accelerate someone's growth, help them get unstuck, and really kind of get to their next level, because I can see and hear with just what they're missing, and sometimes just ever so slightly missing, but something that's been holding them back for a long time.
And a lot of that, not just from that experience, but from all the books and tips that you listen to, you've pulled out different scenarios through those books, things that you read, but that added to your own knowledge of being able to help businesses get unstuck. Yeah. And I can relate a little bit to what you're talking about there, because I wasn't diagnosed till I was 17 that I was ADD.
Uh-huh.
Also ADHD, I was so hyperactive when I was a kid. And when I was 17, I was given Ritalin. And I remember being in the kitchen and I'm reading a book. And normally I would read a book, I would be very distracted. I would be not paying attention. All of a sudden, boom, boom, I finished the book and there was 0 distractions. Yet when I was done with that, I said to my parents, wow, man, if I had known all of this, I think I would be in Harvard by now.
Yeah.
I felt so smart. I was able to capture and retain that information, and then from there on, everything became much, much easier, and I was able to be a better writer, speaker, and everything. I was able to read, and that's kind of a very, very hard thing for people to understand, that um, that a disability is not really a disability, it's just a different way of an ability. And a lot of times, that disability heightens that awareness and creates other, like you said, other senses.
Yeah.
So basically, that goes right into my next statement. How are you able to when you're working with clients, how do you point out those abilities, those people who can't really see it? How do you able to put that information out?
Well, I ask a lot of questions. It's and then I be quiet, and then I'm quiet. And so, I take a lot of times, and this isn't mandatory, but most of my clients start with a deep dive of whether it's anywhere between 2 and 10 hours. Where we're doing a deep dive, it depends on the size of the business. Doing a deep dive, and I'm understanding every element of everything that they've ever done and how they got to where they are. And I can pull out themes that they are overlooking, that they don't see. I can kind of hear and see kind of the patterns of how they do things, like a puzzle in a way. Mm-hmm. And then I help them kind of, put the puzzle together that accelerates the growth and get rid of a lot of the distractions that are getting in their way. And then create the vision of help them start creating the vision of where they want to go, and then reverse engineering the tools. And that process doesn't happen overnight. Sometimes people want it to, they say, oh, well, can I do it in an hour or two? No, it takes a long time to, I'm a really great business coach, but I'm not a magician. And so I can't make it happen overnight. It's a process, because an individual can only process so much at one time. And change is difficult. Some people can move faster than others, but the key is the consistency. I would say about 80% of my clients, when they start, they don't stop working with me, because they know that through weekly or bi-weekly coaching sessions with me, ranging from 15 minutes to an hour, they are getting what they need to accomplish that next week, that next 2 weeks, the tools, the mindset, getting rid of distractions, the hyper focus, the accountability, the ideas, all of this to help them get unstuck. Because as they raise their level of consciousness, they're at a new level of consciousness. So they see things from a different perspective with new lenses that they didn't see the week prior, the month prior, and the year prior. And so that's why it's a constant growth mechanism of working with somebody to really evolve and for them to really see and experience the change.
And a lot of that has to do with treating the muscles of the brain to accept that information and be able to act upon that information.
Right.
And we tend to obviously get stuck, but we tend to have our own perceived notions of expectations of whatever it is. And you're coming in and say, hey, listen, enough of that.
Correct.
Hold on, let's get back to the root of what's really happening. And
right. And most people trip over themselves, and they resist what they need to do most. And their habits are not what they need to accelerate their growth. Their perspective is very limited. Their boardroom all looks the same. They haven't been coached, and so they're not open to feedback, or they hadn't been, and now maybe they are. Their ego is so big that it's affecting the culture and everybody that interacts with them. Coaching is hard work, and sometimes, when you're ready, that a coach is there. And when you use a coach, there's certain things that you just got to be ready and understand the path and the journey that the coach wants to take you on, because sometimes they can see things that you just can't see. And most of the time that's understood. And sometimes, sometimes it works for people and sometimes it doesn't. And that's, it's all about finding the right coach as well that can help you elevate to your next level.
Yes. And I'm thinking about, you mentioned about different boardrooms, CEOs and all that. You've obviously had a ton of experience in speaking of that. You've had a long history of working for corporations. And from my understanding, you love doing that. You worked in finances, you worked at all these different things. And then you said, you know what, I've had enough. I'm ready to go on my own.
Yeah.
What was it that made, why did you make that transition? What was the cutoff point? Did you say, you know what, I need to go on my own. I need to be my own person.
Yeah. Well, that's really it. I had a lot of ideas. I have a voice that I knew I wanted to use in a certain way to help, as many people grow and get unstuck and grow their business as possible. And, I started when I was 23. I've been working since I was 13, but I started at 23. I started an internet company with my brother and a buddy. We ultimately sold that. That was great. That was exciting. I got into commercial real estate. I was a broker. Did that for 6 years. Ended up taking my office over. Did that for 6 years successfully. I went in-house for 1 year and helped another company restructure. And I really just wanted to build something that was creatively in my head since I was 18 years old. It was just time. I didn't want to work for anybody. I didn't want to ask anybody if I could take a day off. I didn't want to ask anybody if I could show up at 8:30 instead of 8, leave early. I didn't want to miss any of my kids' things. I wanted to do what I wanted to do in the way that I wanted to do it. And I had such a strong vision in my head that, and that I had been building since I was 18 years old. It wasn't a question of if, it was just a question of when. And I was ready. And I was just about to turn 42. I was 42. And I remember thinking, I'm not going to be 50 and do this. I don't want to look back and say, I with regret. So I jumped and I did it.
That's when you talk about that, the entrepreneur mindset, the control of controlling your own destiny, in a sense. It is obviously very risky, and I can obviously relate to that. I pretty much been my own boss for just about as much of the time as you have, and for me, is having that control, taking the day off when I want,
Right.
what I want. There's a sense of satisfaction, a sense of accomplishment with that. And
Yeah.
it is not easy, and we welcome that challenge.
Yeah. And I don't even take a lot of days off. It's not even so much about that. It's just the option, right? And
Yes.
and I, and in corporate America, I don't like playing politics. And in corporate America, I always had to play a lot of politics.
Yep.
And you're always watching your back and making sure you say the right thing to the certain people, and it's like it was just exhausting for me. And I think I was good at it because I had to learn how to play the game, but I didn't enjoy it. It wasn't in alignment with my soul, and I didn't want to go to work every day playing like this game of chess where you don't even really know what the real game is. And so I couldn't, and so it just wasn't for me. And so I knew I could start a business my way, my vision, have my team, set up the way I want to set up my team, hire the best of class of everybody. And I did.
That's I like when you're talking about that's exactly what I'm thinking in my head.
Yeah.
Exactly what I went through. Same thing. What I'm very curious about, you were kind of in the beginning of the Silicon Valley internet age when you started this internet company, and then obviously you sold it later. I mean, you talked about it before. You spent hundreds and hundreds of hours just getting into this. What was it again that you did in the beginning?
Yeah, we had a website company in June of 1995 that we started. And it was great. I mean, it was right when the internet was in its infancy. Most people didn't even know what it was. Right. And it was a blast. I mean, my brother and I, and a buddy of ours, we had a blast. We grew it, and then we sold it 2 years later in 1997. We had grown it to about 300 clients, and it was great. It was great. But
what I'm more curious about is, what was it about the internet? Obviously, at that time, I remember getting on the internet going, whoa, this is cool. Like, wow, you can really research it. But what was it that your brother and I, how did you guys, at the sports side, be able to see, oh, wow, I really think we could do something with this. I mean, obviously, you guys sat down and talked about it, came up with a plan, but they had to do something that caught your attention.
It really was the brainchild of my brother and our other business partner, Scott. They were kind of talking about starting this business, this internet business. And I had just graduated college. I had just gotten back from a 3-week trip in Israel. They were starting this business. And I said, oh, I think this, and I just kind of chimed in, basically saying, long story short, this seems like it's going to be the future. I want to be a equal partner, and I'll do all the sales. I'll kind of lead the sales. And it was in my parents' great room. I mean, there was no, basically that's where negotiating took place. There was nothing to build at that time. There was no industry. But I thought, I just graduated college, didn't have a job. I didn't know what I was going to do, wanted to get into business, wanted to start my own company, didn't know what that was. They were kind of talking about it. It sounded like the future. And I said, hey, give me a third of the company and I'll run the sales and grow the sales team. And that's what we did. I mean, it was like pretty, boom, boom, boom. And then we just kind of started growing it relatively quickly at that point.
That's the challenge of the unknown. And I think it's very rare for people to see that and want to take on that challenge. Yeah. That's what the entrepreneur mindset is, to take that risk and just kind of run with it. Obviously, right. Same thing, all the different businesses that I've done over the years, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, but I think also, I didn't really know anything about the internet at the time, but I did a ton of research. I would go to Barnes and Noble and I would, get these magazines and get whatever books were written, and read as much as I possibly could. So I could educate myself. And then, we created some brochures and some packages, and I literally took a phone book and started cold calling. And it was a ton of fun. I miss those days. They were, they were just fun, and we were working on ping pong tables, and it was just really, really fun. Yeah, those were good days.
Sounds like the original version of Google. Google has all that stuff in their
Yeah.
You beat them with the punch.
Yeah, I guess so. I never thought about that, but yeah. But our ping pong tables were used as desks, not really, playing ping pong. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. When we're talking about these businesses, and we're talking about digging a little bit deeper and understanding the client and understanding how and the why, we've talked about multiple times about finding the client avatar. And what I'm very curious about is, what does that actually mean in order to actually grow the business?
So what's the question?
The question is, what is the client avatar? What is so important about finding
Gotcha.
avatar?
Well, I think, we must know who our ideal clients are, right? Down to all the nitty gritty. And we also need to identify who our clients are not. And when we know who our clients are, then we understand how to attract them to us through our messaging. I'm a big fan of, having a very simple message. My message is, my tagline is grow your business big, very big. If you go to my website, you'll see I work with successful people who are stuck and want to get unstuck and want to think big, right? So very kind of simple steps that I can work with people to get unstuck. And so I understand, like, those are my clients, right? They fall into categories where they are ready to get unstuck. Their ego is at the door. They're ready to coach, ready to do the work. They're ready to be consistent and do things on an ongoing basis. Where somebody who's saying, hey, I might remember I went to a meeting years ago and the guy said, well, I'm happy where I'm at and I don't want to think big. I said, well, that's great. Right. So I can't, then there's no reason for us to, there's no reason for you to use me. If that's where you are, that's not my client. And so I think for all companies, though, and for all clients, it's really, really important to know who your client is and how you're messaging to them. What's your ask and attract? How are you getting them into your funnel? How are you getting them to call you? How are you getting them to your website, your social platform? Because the messaging has to be repeated over and over and over again, up to 17, 50, sometimes 100 times before somebody actually picks you up. maybe picks up the phone to call you. And so you want to be clear so the message consistently is clear and doesn't confuse your ideal client / avatar.
I think that's a very important point, because you look at these bigger companies, most of the bigger companies out there are pretty consistent with it. And when you get into the medium, smaller sized companies, where you go to their website and you see all these different things, you're like, oh, wait, what are they really good at? But you're not quite sure. You see all these different things. So for me, what I've learned through the years that I've made plenty of mistakes is,
Yeah.
for me, I'm CrossFit Bloomfield. That's what we do. We're good at CrossFit. We have great coaching, and that's what I've pretty much stuck by, and we've been pretty successful with that.
Yeah.
So I've read your book, The Think Movement.
Thank you.
I touched you right after I read that book, and I highly suggest this book for anybody, whether you
Thank you.
it or not, because the way that you wrote that book is very eloquent, and it's very easy to read, and it's right to the point, and it makes you think about a lot of things. Can you give us just a quick little Reader's Digest version of it? You talked about being unstuck.
Yeah.
Which is a little
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks for reading the book. I loved writing it and had a blast with it. It basically is about a guy who is in business and he's stuck and he can't figure out why. And through the book, he comes across a series of a lot of guides that help him get unstuck. Because getting, as a coach, I'm a guide, right? My client is the hero. And my goal is to always make them the hero. And I'm a big believer that all the guides that give you and mentors that come across your path happen for a reason. And if you're open to the feedback and the coaching, then you can get unstuck, you can get back to center, you can get back into alignment, and then you can see a little bit more clearly on what those next steps should be. And so that's what happens to the main character, Jacob, in the book. He's stuck and comes across all of these guides, all of these mentors, and gets introduced to all these different people, ultimately a business coach, and he evolves to the level of where he wants to evolve with, and gets in alignment with his purpose, his soul, his business, and his personal life as well. And it's a business book told as a parable, because I think stories are easier to absorb and read.
There you go. That's a very quick summary. I love it.
Yeah. Thanks, Jordan.
Well, let's talk about the pandemic. What do you think are the benefits of starting a business in the pandemic versus prior to the pandemic?
Yeah. Well, I think we're seeing a lot of entrepreneurs pop up with the pandemic. We are seeing people who are laid off and taking control in their own hands and starting their own businesses. And during the pandemic, I think, working remotely, working in any room in your house with virtual teams is totally normal. Where even I think a year ago, it was still a little bit kind of like, it had that, oh, you're working from your basement with a virtual assistant and you're not that real. Today, it doesn't matter. It completely changed the game. You can be a very profitable, scalable company and be a solopreneur working out of your house with a virtual team that's quite extensive. I interview people all the time on my podcast who are running major companies, multi-million, and sometimes in the hundreds of millions of dollars, with a team of 10 to 15 people, and really a majority of just virtual people and support staff to help with things. And so I think the stigma of that is gone. I also think there's a lot of new ideas that are coming to the surface because of how people learn and what people are in need of. The online space, everything is moving to e-commerce more so than ever before. Most people thought of e-commerce as a retail avenue, but really it's for professional service companies as well. Everybody needs to figure out how to get online, grow online, and for their internal people and attracting new people. And so you have experts that I think that will start to pop up who have been experts in industries and corporations for 10, 20, 30 years. They're going to start their own businesses in very niche specialty markets, helping other companies grow in, growing their HR, growing recruiting, growing, and most importantly, training. I do a ton of training, and most companies do not train their people enough. It's one of the biggest issues I hear from companies is that our people don't train us enough. And companies see a huge turnover when it comes to A, not training enough, and B, not connecting with their people because they feel like they don't matter. And so I think there's so many opportunities in the e-commerce space and the virtual space and growing in all of those areas. It's huge. For me, I grew an arm of my business during the pandemic that couldn't have survived a year ago because the market wasn't really as flush for it as it is now. My coaching is one-on-one, very custom, high-end training, but I never liked turning people away. So I created a group coaching model where those that can afford the custom one-on-one coaching can afford the $50 a month group coaching. And it's live every Monday, and it's me, and there's a private Facebook group. And so I think you're going to start seeing a lot more of that from other people because A, it's affordable, and B, you get a ton of value. And so I think we're going to see a lot of great new things pop up. Studies show that, by 2030, 85% of the jobs that exist today don't exist yet. Excuse me, by 85% of the jobs that exist in 2030 don't exist today, and those are pre-COVID numbers. And so I think we're going to start to see a lot of new things pop up.
And I like that because people are obviously afraid of starting an online business, and I am one of them because for years I've been trying to do something online, but I wasn't sure what that is. Now I'm starting to get more in alignment, and I'm starting to understand what that is, and I'm not afraid to take that jump.
Yeah. And I also think that's a big thing too. People are more in alignment with their personal values today than they were 9, 10, 12 months ago because of COVID. And people want to be in alignment with themselves. They realize, life is short, life changes, and they have these ideas. They want to jump in, whether it's a full-time or part-time business or a side hustle. People want to have control instead of potentially being in a situation where they can get laid off.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What's the greatest lesson you've actually learned from a client?
I would say the common theme of the greatest lessons I've always learned from clients are slow down. Slow down. I would say I on my podcast, I ask, one of my questions is, what's the biggest, greatest piece of advice you ever received? And a lot of it is, and I'm paraphrasing a lot of it, but a lot of it has the energy and the review of slow down, be present, and enjoy the journey. And I know it's like they might say that may sound very cliche, but it's true. You have to just slow down and enjoy it. And I can never remind myself that enough.
Well, that's the whole point of this podcast.
Oh, yeah, I guess so. Yeah. Being in the moment. Yeah.
And one last thing, what's the most important lesson you've learned from a mentor?
I had a business coach for about 14 years, Jules Rappaport, and he was the greatest. And he passed away unexpectedly, and I just loved him, and he taught me so much. And he always used to say to me that I needed to be more selfish, right? That I was so selfless. And he would always say, you gotta be more selfish and know when to say no, and make sure you're taking care of yourself, and just be a little bit more selfish. And when I always would get so irritated with him when he would say it, because I never really understood what he meant. But the older I get, the more I realize what he meant, which is, you've got to focus. You've got to know what to say yes to. You've got to know what to say no to. And you don't always have to be such a people pleaser. You can be selfish. You can say no, take care of yourself, take care of your family. And And yeah, that was great advice. I think about that all the time, and my perspective and consciousness of it is always evolving as I think about that and him.
You know what? I knowing what I know now, I can totally relate and I understand what that means.
Yeah,
If you would have said that to me 5 years ago, it wouldn't have made any sense. But now
yeah,
I'm thinking about it, it makes perfect sense.
yeah, yeah.
Makes
So that's
sense.
it. Yeah, that's Jules.
And the last question I have is, what brings you joy? What brings you joy?
My family, my family, my kids and my wife and my dogs, my family, first and foremost. Everything, my family always comes first, period, the end, before anything. And that's what brings me pure joy. My kids, my wife, our two dogs, my family, hugging them, loving them. And that's what brings me joy. I, of course, love what I do, and I'm passionate about my career. I love what I do every second of it. And it brings me joy helping clients get unstuck and finding fulfillment and reaching their potential and next level. But my family is the ultimate. Yeah.
Well, John, thank you very much. It was an absolute pleasure to hear your story, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks, Jordan. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on the show.
You got it. All right.